History is full of twists and turns. But what if there's more to the story? I'm James Mackay, and on History Unfiltered, we dig deep into the moments that change the world, but often don't get told as they should. History is often told from a single perspective, but what if there's more to the story? Welcome to History Unfiltered. Episode 1. The Assassination that Changed the World. The Death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Hello and welcome to History Unfiltered, the podcast where we dig deeper into the untold stories of the past, question the mainstream narratives, and hopefully have a bit of fun along the way. I'm James Mackay, your host, and today we're diving into one of the most pivotal events in modern history, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria in 1914, which famously triggered World War I. Now, before anyone starts humming Take Me Out, yes, Franz Ferdinand was indeed a famous name, but this Franz Ferdinand isn't the rock band. If you're waiting for a catchy tune, you might be disappointed, but if you're ready for a deep dive into a murder that set the world on fire, well, stay tuned. Alright, let's get serious. On June the 28th, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were assassinated in Sarajevo. And in that single moment, the course of history changed forever. But what exactly led to this moment of tragedy? I think one thing that's important to note is that Franz Ferdinand was not just a figurehead. He had strong views about reforming the whole empire. He wasn't just sitting on the throne waiting for a rock band to name themselves after him. He was pushing for changes that could have drastically altered the political landscape of Europe. He was definitely no pushover, and a man with ideas, including advocating for a more federalised Austro-Hungarian empire, which could have lessened some of the ethnic tensions brewing in Europe. But of course, in the eyes of some, he was a threat, especially to nationalist groups who wanted to see the empire collapse. And his assassination was carried out by a group called the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist organisation. They saw him as the embodiment of everything they wanted to overthrow. The irony? Whilst Franz Ferdinand was not an enemy of the Serbs, the nationalist faction thought his reforms would undermine their cause. So in their mind, getting rid of him was a necessary step. Now I know it's tempting to think that this was just a random act of violence, especially given the circumstances of the assassination, but when you start pulling at the threads you realise just how interconnected the political landscape was. It wasn't just an isolated event, it was the spark that ignited a powder keg. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand in what was the final straw in a delicate balance of alliances, political instability and rising nationalism. What followed was an avalanche of events that spiralled into World War I. Within weeks, Europe was at war and millions of lives were lost, all from one shot. Even more intriguing, there's also a lot of irony that despite all the plotting by the Serbs, Franz Ferdinand himself was actually almost assassinated earlier that same day. He and Sophie had been in Sarajevo and their car route had been altered unexpectedly, leading them to take a different path right into the path of the assassin, Gavrilo Princip. It was pure luck or misfortune that they ended up in the right place at the right time for the assassin. That's the sort of chaotic twist history loves to throw at us. Talk about fate, right? They survived the first attempt only to end up in front of the man who would deliver the fatal blow. It's almost as if history really wanted this to happen, and yet if Franz Ferdinand had survived, there's a chance the Great War could never have happened, or maybe even delayed. But we'll never know, will we? And I guess that's what makes this such a fascinating moment in history. A single, tragic event on a random street in Sarajevo set off a chain reaction that brought down empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually Tsarist Russia, all toppled in the wake of World War I. It's crazy when you think about it. One guy's assassination caused the unravelling of centuries-old empires, and to think a few years later this would lead to the rise of Hitler and the outbreak of World War II. History is full of these strange but crucial moments. Looking at the legacy of World War I, you can trace back so many of the issues that led to later conflicts, including World War II, but perhaps we'll save that for another season. Back to the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. It's like a butterfly effect, one small act with huge global consequences. And it brings us really to the final question. What would have happened if Franz Ferdinand hadn't been assassinated? Would World War I have happened anyway? Could Europe have avoided the catastrophic war that reshaped the world? It's a fascinating thought, but we'll never know for sure. One thing is certain, though, that his death was the catalyst for a much larger conflict, and it brought about some significant changes in the way we think about international diplomacy, alliances, and even the concept of war itself. In the end, it might have been one of the most tragic and consequential deaths in history. Well, there you have it, from a random street in Sarajevo to the catastrophe of global war. Franz Ferdinand's death set off a chain reaction that altered the course of history, not just for Europe, but for the entire world. It's always a reminder that history is a lot more interconnected than we might think. One event, one action can change everything. And for the people of Austria-Hungary, that's exactly what happened. He was seen as a figure that could have modernised the empire and restructured its power. But unfortunately that led to the immediate response from the leadership in Austria-Hungary into shock and anger. They saw the killing as a direct threat to the stability of their empire, especially as it was carried out by a member of the Serbian nationalist group, the Black Hand. For the common people of Austria-Hungary, the assassination had mixed effects. On one hand, there was a surge of nationalism. Many Austro-Hungarian citizens rallied behind the idea of taking revenge and preserving the empire's honour. It's like the assassination became a rallying cry. But the government, especially under Emperor Franz Joseph, quickly moved towards war. For many ordinary Austrians, war seemed inevitable and patriotic fever was high. But at the same time, there was fear. War meant uncertainty. The empire was already dealing with internal tensions from different ethnic groups, and the idea of fighting a war with such diverse populations who didn't always feel loyalty to the central government added an extra layer of anxiety. This was also happening at a time when Europe's political alliances were pretty complex. Austria-Hungary was aligning with Germany, but not everyone in the empire supported this, especially many Slavs and others who felt oppressed and feared that this could deepen their subjugation. The people of the empire were in a delicate position. For the elites, this event marked the start of a military escalation, but for the average citizen, life suddenly felt a lot more precarious. In the coming weeks, the government's decision to declare war on Serbia and then the domino effect that led to the involvement of multiple countries threw the empire into the chaos of World War I. That's where things really changed. What started as a desire to preserve and protect the empire ultimately led to its disintegration. The people of Austria-Hungary, especially in the empire's final years, would experience economic hardship, military defeat, and the unravelling of centuries-old political structures and infrastructure in their country. But I suppose that's the irony of Franz Ferdinand's death. His assassination could have been a moment for reform and triumph, but instead it acted as the catalyst for the empire's collapse. The people of Austria-Hungary, in many ways, didn't realise how dramatically their lives would change in the wake of that single violent act. So let's switch gears a little bit. So let's talk about Franz Ferdinand, the band. So Franz Ferdinand were formed in Glasgow in 2002. And they really liked the idea of naming the band after a pivotal moment in history. So what better than naming it Franz Ferdinand after the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So Franz Ferdinand has got some absolutely amazing tracks, my favourite one being Take Me Out, although I do love their new one, which is Night and Day. I know they've very much been influenced by bands like The Clash, David Bowie, Talking Heads and Gang of Four, to name just a few. Well, there you have it. That's a bit more about Franz Ferdinand the band than perhaps we should be doing on History Unfiltered. But it's always interesting to have a look at how history has affected modern times. So thank you so much for tuning into History Unfiltered. We'll be back next time with some more untold stories and some hidden truths. Until then, remember, history is never just black and white. It's a story that's still being written. Join us next week on History Unfiltered. Available wherever you get your podcasts.